The stars burned cold and distant in the void of space. Between them, something moved that made even the darkness seem afraid. The Velkari war fleet drifted through the galaxy like a disease, leaving nothing but death behind them but war. Prince Zekthar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching another world die. The planet below had once been green and blue, covered with cities and forests. Now it was gray ash and glowing craters. His bioships had fed well today. The living vessels pulsed with satisfaction, their organic hulls rippling as they digested. The remains of another civilization. "Status report," Zekthar commanded. His voice was deep and harsh, like grinding metal. "The feeding is complete, War Prince," replied his second-in-command. "The bioships have consumed all useful organic matter. Population eliminated. No survivors detected." Zekthar nodded. It was always the same. Every world, every species, every civilization they encountered ended the same way. Some tried to fight. Some tried to hide. Some begged for mercy. None of it mattered. The Velkari were perfect killing machines, and they had been killing for 1,000 years. The War Prince was 12 feet tall, his body a mix of flesh and metal that had been shaped by centuries of bioengineering. His skin was black chitin, harder than steel. His eyes glowed red in the darkness of the bridge. Tubes and wires connected his brain directly to the ship's living nervous system. He could feel everything the massive creature felt, its hunger, its satisfaction, its endless need to consume and grow. "Show me the star charts," he ordered. A hologram appeared in the air before him. It showed the galaxy spread out like a spiral of light. Large sections were marked in red, territories conquered by the Velkari Empire. The red had been growing. For 1,000 years, swallowing star system after star system. Zekthar studied the map with cold satisfaction. They had destroyed the Zephyrans first. Those crystal beings had been masters of energy, able to turn starlight into weapons. It had taken the Velkari 50 years to crack their defenses and shatter their crystal cities. The screaming had been beautiful dot, then came the collective of 1,000 worlds. A hive mind that controlled billions of bodies across hundreds of planets. They had perfect coordination and technology that seemed like magic. But the Velkari had learned to corrupt their shared consciousness, turning their greatest strength into weakness. The collective had torn itself apart from within. The ethereals had been the most challenging. Ancient beings of pure thought who had given up physical bodies millions of years ago. They existed as living energy, traveling between dimensions. But the Velkari had found a way to trap them, to force them back into flesh so they could be properly killed. Their death screams had echoed across space itself. Now the galaxy belonged to the Velkari. 3 spiral arms were under their control. Countless species had been wiped from existence. Entire civilizations had been reduced to nutrients for the bioships. "War Prince," called the navigator. "We are approaching the edge of the next spiral. Arm. Our scouts report primitive life forms ahead." Zekthar moved to the viewing screen. The new star system appeared before them, a small, yellow sun with several planets orbiting around it. One of the planets was blue and white, clearly supporting life. "Analysis," he demanded. "The inhabitants call themselves humans," the scout reported. "Bipedal mammals, average height 6 feet. They have barely achieved interstellar travel. Their technology is primitive. Chemical rockets, nuclear fission, basic energy weapons. They are currently engaged in warfare among themselves." Zekthar laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "How refreshing. A species that kills itself. We may not even need to do much work. They have a population of approximately 8 billion on their home world," the scout continued. "Several small colonies on nearby planets and moons. Total population across their territory is less than 10 billion. "Pathetic," Zekthar said. The Zephyrons had 1 trillion citizens. The collective numbered in the hundreds of billions. These humans are barely worth noticing. But something nagged at him as he stared at the star charts. This sector of space looked familiar somehow. His bioneural implants searched through the vast databases stored in his modified brain. Ancient records, fragments of data from civilizations. Destroyed long ago. There. Deep in the archives. Warning markers in dead languages. Symbols that roughly translated to dangerous words. The quiet ones. Speakers in the dark. Those who listen. The markers surrounded this entire spiral arm. Navigator, Zekthar called. What do our historical records say about this region of space? The navigator's eyes went blank as he accessed the data cores. Very little, War Prince. This sector was largely ignored by previous galactic civilizations. Most records simply mark it as unexplored or uninteresting. There are some warning markers, but they appear to be superstitious nonsense from extinct species. Zekthar frowned. The Velkari had learned not to ignore warnings left by dead civilizations. Usually, those warnings existed for good reasons. But what could be dangerous about such primitive creatures? Show me more details about these humans, he ordered. The hologram shifted, displaying images captured by their long-range scouts. The humans looked soft and weak. No natural armor, no claws or fangs, no obvious weapons built into their bodies. They seemed to rely entirely on tools and technology for survival. But as Zekthar watched, he noticed something strange. In every image, the humans were in groups. They were talking to each other, working together, sharing resources. Even in their wars, they showed concern for their wounded enemies. They had concepts that the Velkari had abandoned long ago. Mercy, compassion, cooperation. Fascinating, he murmured. They fight each other, but they also care for each other. How contradictory. Shall we begin the assault, War Prince? Asked his weapons master. Our bioships are hungry again. The last feeding was barely enough to satisfy them. Zekthar considered. Something about this situation felt wrong, but he could not identify what. The humans were clearly no threat. Their weapons were laughable compared to Velkari biotechnology. Their numbers were tiny. Their civilization was young and fragmented. And yet those ancient warnings continued to bother him. We will proceed as planned, he decided. But carefully. Send advance scouts to gather more intelligence. I want to understand these creatures before we consume them. The bioships began moving toward the human system, their living hulls rippling with anticipation. Each vessel was the size of a small moon, bred specifically for warfare and feeding. Their weapons were living organisms that could adapt to any defense. Their armor was self-healing biological material stronger than any metal. As they traveled through space, Zekthar found himself thinking about the long history of Velkari conquest. For 1,000 years, they had been the apex predators of the galaxy. Nothing could stand against them. Nothing could even slow them down. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between battles, he wondered what it had all been for. They had destroyed countless wonders, eliminated millions of unique species, erased entire cultures from existence. What did they have to show for it besides empty space and dead worlds? He pushed such thoughts away. The Velkari were warriors. Conquest was their purpose. Destruction was their art. They had no need for the soft concepts that made other species weak. The human system grew larger on their screens. Soon, they would make contact. Soon, another world would feed their bioships. Soon, another species would join the endless list of the extinct. But as they approached, those ancient warnings seemed to whisper in the darkness of space. Be careful. These are not what they seem. These are the quiet ones. These are the speakers in the dark. Zekthar ignored the whispers. After all, What could such primitive creatures possibly do to the mighty Valkyrie Empire? He would soon discover that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are not the ones who scream the loudest, but the ones who speak the softest. Sometimes the greatest weapons are not built from metal and energy, but from understanding and compassion. The Valkyrie were about to learn that there are forces in the universe more powerful than fear, and they were racing straight toward them at faster than light speed. The Valkyrie bioships dropped out of hyperspace like falling nightmares. Their massive forms blotted out the stars, casting shadows across the human colonies on the outer planets. Each vessel pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that served as threat displays, warnings that had made countless species surrender without a fight. War Prince Zekthar expected the usual response. Panic transmissions filled with screaming, desperate attempts to contact distant allies, pathetic offers of tribute and surrender. He had heard them all before, in thousands of different languages, from hundreds of different species. They all sounded the same in the end, the sound of prey realizing it was about to die. Instead, silence filled the communication channels. Zekthar frowned, his red eyes scanning the displays on his bridge. Communications officer, why are we receiving no transmissions from the humans? Unknown, War Prince. Our sensors detect active communication networks throughout their system. They are clearly aware of our presence, but they are not transmitting. To us, perhaps they are paralyzed with terror, suggested the weapons master. Some species simply freeze when faced with superior predators. But even as he spoke, the sensors showed human ships moving throughout their system, not fleeing in panic, but continuing their normal activities. Supply runs between colonies, scientific expeditions, even what appeared to be recreational travel. They are ignoring us, Zekthar realized. The concept was so alien that he had trouble processing it. They see our fleet, and they are ignoring us. Then finally, a transmission came through. The signal was clear and strong, broadcast on multiple frequencies, so there could be no mistake. But the content was not what any Valkyrie had ever heard before. Greetings, visitors. Welcome to our solar system. We have been monitoring your approach and are honored by your presence. Could you please identify yourselves and state your intentions? We would very much like to establish communications. The voice was calm and friendly, like someone greeting neighbors at a social gathering. There was no fear, no desperation, no recognition that death had just arrived in their system. Just polite curiosity and what sounded almost like ... enthusiasm. Zekthar stared at the communication console as if it had become a dangerous animal. In 1,000 years of conquest, no species had ever welcomed the Valkyrie. Most had not even managed to remain calm enough to speak coherently. Is this some kind of trick? He asked his intelligence officer. Unknown, War Prince. Our scans show no hidden weapons, no trap formations, no signs of advanced military preparation. Their defensive capabilities appear exactly as primitive as our initial reports suggested. Zekthar activated the communication system. When he spoke, his voice carried the full authority and menace of the Valkyrie Empire. I am War Prince Zekthar of the Valkyrie Empire. We have come to claim this system. You will surrender immediately and prepare for consumption, or you will be destroyed. You have one standard time unit to comply. It was the same ultimatum he had delivered to countless worlds. Usually, it was followed by desperate pleas for mercy, offers of anything the species possessed, sometimes complete civilizational breakdown as governments collapsed in panic. The human response came quickly. The same calm, friendly voice as before. Thank you for the introduction, War Prince Zekthar. We understand your position, and we appreciate you giving us time to respond. However, before we make any decisions, we would very much like to open a dialogue with you. Would you be willing to send a representative for a face-to-face discussion? We promise safe passage, and what we believe will be a very interesting conversation. Zekthar felt something he had not experienced in centuries: confusion. They want to dock? It appears so, War Prince, his communications officer confirmed. They understand that we are here to destroy them. The message was quite clear on that point. And they want to have a conversation? Yes, War Prince. Across the bridge, Velkari officers exchanged glances. This was completely outside their experience. Species either fought or surrendered. They did not invite their conquerors to chat, but what disturbed Zekthar most was not the strange request itself. It was the effect it was having on his bioneural systems. The organic implants that connected him to the ship's consciousness were sending warning signals throughout his body. Every evolved instinct was screaming that something was wrong, that they were in danger. But danger from what? These humans had weapons that could barely damage Velkari armor. Their ships were primitive metal constructs that moved slower than Velkari biovessels. Their numbers were insignificant. War Prince, his tactical officer reported. The humans are transmitting coordinates for a meeting location. It appears to be a space station orbiting their moon. Zekthar studied the tactical display. The station was small and simple, constructed from basic metals and ceramics. It had no weapons that their sensors could detect. It posed no threat to even a single Velkari warrior, much less their entire fleet. They want us to come to them. He mused. It could be a trap, suggested his security chief. What trap could such primitives possibly set that we could not escape? Zekthar replied. But even as he said it, those ancient warnings from the database echoed in his mind. The quiet ones. Speakers in the dark thought another transmission arrived. This time, the signal included visual data. A human face appeared on the communication screen. Small, soft features, with pale skin and dark hair. The creature looked impossibly fragile compared to the armored bulk of a Velkari warrior. War Prince Zekthar, my name is Dr. Sarah Chun. I'm a xenobiologist, someone who studies alien life forms. I realize this situation is unusual, but we genuinely would like to learn about you and your people. We've prepared refreshments and comfortable accommodations. Would you consider joining us? The human Dr. Chun smiled as she spoke. Zekthar had seen smiles before, usually right before species tried to deceive or manipulate his forces. But this smile was different. It seemed genuine, warm, and completely unafraid. You study alien life? Zekthar found himself asking. It's my life's work, Dr. Chun replied. I've been fascinated by the possibility of meeting other intelligent species since I was a child. When our sensors detected your fleet, I have to admit, I was more excited than afraid. The opportunity to learn about your biology, your culture, your history, it's beyond anything I could have imagined. Zekthar felt his bioneural systems sending increasingly urgent warning signals. This was wrong. This was all wrong. Prey species did not get excited about meeting their predators. They did not invite them for refreshments and comfortable conversation. You realize we are here to kill you, he said bluntly. I understand that's what you've told us, Dr. Chun replied. But I'm hoping that once we get to know each other, you might reconsider. After all, you must have traveled a very long way to get here. Surely you have time for a brief conversation before making any final decisions? The simplicity of the statement was somehow more unsettling than any weapon could have been. She was treating the annihilation of her species as a decision. That might be changed through polite discussion. War Prince, his second-in-command, whispered, this feels like a trap. But Zekthar found himself curious despite every instinct screaming warnings. In 1,000 years of conquest, no species had ever reacted this way. No one had ever been excited to meet the Velkari. No one had ever offered refreshments to their Own destroyers. Very well, he decided. I will send a diplomatic drone to your station. But understand, this changes nothing. We are still here to claim your system. Of course, Dr. Chun replied cheerfully. We understand your position completely. We just hope you'll keep an open mind during our conversation. I think you'll find it illuminating. As the communication ended, Zekthar found himself staring at the blank screen. Something about the word illuminating had sent a chill through his enhanced nervous system. But why? It was just a word. Just a promise of interesting conversation. He ordered a diplomatic drone prepared, a semi-autonomous bioconstruct that could speak with his voice and report back everything it experienced. As the drone launched toward the human station, Zekthar settled back to observe whatever trap these strange creatures had prepared. But deep in his genetic memory, ancient warnings continued to echo. The quiet ones did not scream when death came for them. They did not run or hide or beg. They spoke softly and listened carefully, and somehow that was more dangerous than any weapon ever forged. The Velkari were about to discover why entire galactic civilizations had marked this region of space with symbols of warning. They were about to learn that sometimes the most terrifying predators are not the ones with the biggest teeth, but the ones who invite you to sit down and tell them all about yourself. The drone approached the human station, and with it, the first crack appeared in an empire that had seemed unbreakable for 1,000 years. The diplomatic drone docked with the human station through an airlock that had been hastily modified to accommodate its biomechanical form. As it moved through the corridors, the drone's sensors recorded everything: the simple metal construction, the basic lighting systems, the complete absence of visible weapons or defenses. What it found instead was something far more unsettling: normalcy. The humans had prepared a meeting room with comfortable chairs, soft lighting, and a table covered with various foods and drinks. Dr. Sarah Chun was waiting, along with another human who introduced himself as Ambassador David Park. They both stood and smiled when the drone entered, as if welcoming an old friend rather than a representative of their future destroyers. Welcome aboard, Dr. Chun said warmly. Please, make yourself comfortable. Can we offer you anything? We weren't sure what your dietary requirements might be, so we prepared a variety of options. The drone, speaking with War Prince Zekthar's voice, replied with suspicion. We do not require your food. State your terms for surrender. Oh, we're not here to discuss surrender, Ambassador Park said pleasantly. We're here to get to know you. Dr. Chun has been absolutely fascinated by your bioships. The integration of organic and mechanical systems is remarkable. How did your people develop such advanced bioengineering? War Prince Zekthar, watching through the drone's sensors from his flagship, felt a moment of complete disorientation. They were asking about Velkari technology with genuine scientific curiosity, not trying to find weaknesses or steal secrets, but simply wanting to understand how it worked. Our bioengineering is a weapon of war, he replied through the drone. It exists to make us more efficient killers. Yes, but before that, Dr. Chun said, leaning forward with interest, your people must have had incredible biological knowledge to begin with. The complexity of merging living tissue with mechanical components, the neural interface systems, the self-repair capabilities. This represents millions of years of scientific development. What was your civilization like when you first began these experiments? The question hit Zekthar like a physical blow. No one had asked about Velkari history in centuries. No one had ever cared what they were before they became conquerors. The ancient memories stirred in his bioneural implants, images of a different time, when Velkari science had been focused on healing rather than harming, on growth rather than destruction. We were ... double quotes, he began, then stopped. Why was he answering? Why did these creatures' curiosity compel him to respond? Take your time, Ambassador Park said gently. We're in no hurry. Would you like to sit down? Dr. Chun and I were just discussing how remarkable it is that your people managed to create living starships. The engineering challenges alone must have been incredible. The drone found itself settling into one of the offered chairs. The action was automatic, guided by social instincts that the Velkari had not used for warfare in so long that Zeek-Thar had forgotten they existed. Our ancestors were healers, he heard himself saying. Bioengineering was originally developed to cure diseases, to extend life, to help damaged organisms repair themselves. That makes perfect sense, Dr. Chun said, making notes on a small tablet. You'd need that foundation of biological knowledge before you could develop more advanced applications. What changed? How did healing technology become military technology? Again, that gentle curiosity that seemed to pull answers from deep inside him. Zeek-Thar tried to focus on his purpose. He was here to gather intelligence before the conquest. But instead, he found himself remembering. There was a war, he said slowly. Our planet was attacked by a species called the Devourers. They consumed everything, plants, animals, even the soil itself. Our healing technology wasn't enough to save the dying, so we adapted it. We made our bodies stronger, harder, more resistant to damage. We turned our medical bioships into weapons that could fight back. You were defending your home, Ambassador Park said with understanding. That must have been terrifying. How long did the war last? 300 years. Zeek-Thar replied. By the end, we had become something our ancestors would not have recognized. But we had survived. We had won. And then? Dr. Chun asked. The question hung in the air. Zeek-Thar realized he had never thought about it that way before. What had happened after they won? Why had they continued to change, to become more aggressive, more militaristic? The galaxy was dangerous, he said finally. Other species saw our strength and feared us. They formed alliances against us. We had to strike first, or they would have destroyed us. A cycle of fear, Ambassador Park mused. You were afraid they would attack, so you attacked them first. But then their neighbors became afraid of you, so you had to attack them too. And it just kept spreading. The words cut through Zeek-Thar like a blade. No one had ever described the Velkari expansion that way before. They had always spoken of it as conquest, as destiny, as the natural order of strong species ruling over weak ones. Not as fear driving more fear in an endless spiral. We are not afraid, he said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. Of course you are, Dr. Chun said gently. You'd have to be. You've been fighting for 1,000 years. You've made enemies of everyone you've ever met. You can never stop, never rest, never trust anyone, because the moment you do, all those civilizations you've wronged will come for revenge. That must be exhausting. The observation struck home with devastating accuracy. Zeek-Thar realized that he could not remember the last time he had truly relaxed, truly felt safe. Even on his own flagship, surrounded by the most advanced biotechnology. In the galaxy, he was always watching for threats, always prepared for battle. You don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Don't we? Ambassador Park asked. We've studied your expansion patterns, your military doctrine, your behavior patterns. You never settle on conquered worlds. You never build lasting colonies. You consume what you need and move on. You're not empire builders. You're refugees. You're running from something, but you've been running so long you've forgotten what you're running from. The words hit like physical blows. Zeek-Thar felt his bioneural systems flooding with stress chemicals as suppressed memories began to surface. Images of the Velkari homeworld as it had been before the war. Green spaces and healing centers. Scientists working to cure diseases instead of create them. Warriors who protected rather than conquered. Stop, he said through the drone. I'm sorry, Dr. Chun said immediately. I didn't mean to upset you. Would you like to take a break? We could talk about something else. The kindness in her voice almost broke something inside him. When had anyone last shown concern for his emotional state? When had anyone cared if he was upset? Why are you doing this? He asked. Doing what? Ambassador Park replied, being kind to us, showing interest in our history, treating us like people instead of monsters. Because you are people, Dr. Chun said simply. You're people who have done terrible things, but you're still people. Everyone has a story. Everyone has reasons for the choices they've made. We want to understand your story. Our story is written in the blood of billions, Zekthar said bitterly. Yes, Ambassador Park acknowledged. And that's a terrible thing. But it's not the only thing. Before the blood, there were healers and scientists and artists. There were people who created instead of destroyed. Those people are still inside you, aren't they? Zekthar tried to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. Deep in his genetic memory, in the oldest parts of his bioneural implants, he could feel them, the scientists who had first learned to merge flesh and metal, the healers who had saved countless lives, the artists who had created beauty in living form. What do you want from us? He asked finally. Nothing, Dr. Chun said. We just want to know you, to understand you, to see if maybe, after all these years of running and fighting and being afraid, you might be ready to stop. We cannot stop, Zekthar protested. The galaxy would never forgive us for what we have done. The galaxy doesn't have to forgive you. Ambassador Park said, but you might learn to forgive yourselves. And you might find that there are other options besides conquest and consumption. For the first time in centuries, War Prince Zekthar felt something he had thought was lost forever. Hope. Not hope for victory or dominance, but hope for something different. Something better. On his flagship, alarms began to sound as his emotional state triggered responses in the ship's bioneural network. Other Velkari warriors were detecting the change in his chemical signatures, his brain patterns, his very essence dot, and across the fleet, something unprecedented began to happen. Velkari, who had not felt anything but aggression and hunger for. Generations suddenly experienced a new emotion, curiosity about what their War Prince was learning in that simple human station. The conversation continued, and with each word, each question, each moment of genuine interest and concern, cracks appeared in the foundation of an empire built on fear and violence. The humans were doing something no weapon had ever accomplished. They were making the Velkari remember who they used to be. The conversation stretched on for days. What had begun as a simple intelligence-gathering mission became something neither species had expected, a genuine exchange of ideas, experiences, and understanding. War Prince Zekthar found himself returning to the human station repeatedly, no longer sending drones but coming in person. Each time, more humans joined the discussions. Historians who wanted to understand Velkari culture, anthropologists fascinated by their social structures, artists curious about their aesthetic preferences. None of them seemed afraid. None of them treated him as the monster he knew himself to be. They simply treated him as a person worth knowing. Dr. Chun had become particularly interested in Velkari biology. She asked detailed questions about their reproductive cycles, their genetic modification techniques, their methods of bioship breeding. But she asked with the same enthusiasm she might show for any scientific discovery, not as someone trying to find weaknesses to exploit. The neural interface technology is remarkable, she said during one session, studying scans that Zekthar had voluntarily provided. You've essentially created a perfect symbiosis between organic consciousness and mechanical systems. The applications for medical treatment alone could revolutionize healthcare across the galaxy. We use it to control weapons, Sekthar reminded her. Yes, but imagine if you used it to control healing systems instead, she replied. IO ships designed to repair damaged ecosystems instead of destroying them. Neural interfaces that could help paralyzed individuals walk again. The same technology, but applied to creation rather than destruction. The idea sent strange ripples through Sekthar's consciousness. He had never considered using Velkari technology for healing in centuries. The concepts felt foreign, almost forgotten, like words in a language he had once known but lost. Ambassador, Park had taken a different approach. He asked about Velkari philosophy, their concept of honor, their understanding of purpose and meaning. These were questions that cut even deeper than the scientific ones. You've conquered most of the galaxy, Park observed during one late-night discussion. You've achieved what most species would consider impossible. But what comes next? What happens when there's nothing left to conquer? Sekthar had never considered the question seriously before. The Velkari Empire had always been focused on the next target, the next conquest, the next feeding. The idea of completion, of achieving their goals, and then having to decide what to do afterward, was almost incomprehensible. We will rule, he said, but the words felt empty. Rule what? Park asked gently. Empty space and dead worlds? You don't build cities or create art or raise families on the worlds you conquer. You consume them and move on. What kind of empire is that? A strong one, Sekthar replied automatically. But is it a happy one? Park asked. When was the last time you felt joy, Sekthar? Not satisfaction from victory, not pleasure from conquest, but simple happiness? When did you last laugh, or create something beautiful, or share a moment of connection with another being? The questions hit like targeted weapons. Sekthar realized he could not remember feeling joy. He could barely remember what the emotion felt like. His biomodifications had enhanced his capacity for aggression, focus, and tactical thinking. But somewhere along the way, they had suppressed his ability to experience positive emotions. Velkari had begun requesting permission to join the discussions. At first, Sekthar had refused. This was a command decision, not a social gathering. But as the conversations continued, he found himself curious about what his warriors would think, how they would respond to these strange humans who treated everyone with such inexplicable kindness. The first to join was Sub-Commander Velthara, his chief science officer. She had been modified for enhanced analytical thinking, her emotions suppressed even more than most Velkari. But when Dr. Chun began discussing the theoretical applications of biotechnology for environmental restoration, something awakened in Velthara's ancient genetic memory. I remember, she said suddenly, interrupting Dr. Chun's explanation of terraforming techniques. Before the war, before the modifications, I worked on ecosystem rehabilitation. We had gardens on the homeworld, living art that could adapt and grow and change with the seasons. You were an artist, Dr. Chun said with delight. A biological artist. Could you show us some of your work? Velthara's hands moved without conscious direction, her fingers tracing patterns in the air. As she gestured, bioluminescent organisms began to emerge from her biosuit, tiny, glowing creatures that responded to her neural commands. They formed shapes and patterns, swirling geometries of light that pulsed with their own alien beauty. The humans watched in fascination, asking questions about the organisms, their biology, their relationship with their creator. No one had paid attention to Velthara's artistic abilities in centuries. Most Velkari had forgotten she possessed them. More warriors began joining the sessions. Combat specialists found themselves discussing philosophy with human historians. Bioship pilots shared stories of the beauty they had seen in deep space with human astronomers. Engineers talked about the theoretical possibilities of using their technology for construction rather than destruction. Each conversation revealed another layer of Velkari society that had been buried under centuries of militaristic conditioning. They had poetry, dark, complex verse that spoke of loneliness and the void between stars. They had music, harmonic frequencies that resonated through bioship hulls, creating hauntingly beautiful compositions. They had concepts of family, friendship, and love, though these had been twisted and suppressed by their modifications. The humans listened to everything with genuine interest and respect. They did not judge or condemn, even when the Velkari described the worst of their atrocities. They simply sought to understand how a species of healers and artists had become destroyers, and whether that transformation might be reversible. The interesting thing, Dr. Chon observed during one session, is that you've preserved all of it. The art, the music, the science, the philosophy. It's all still there in your genetic memory, your cultural databases, your personal experiences. You've buried it, but you haven't destroyed it. Why would we preserve what made us weak? Asked Weapons Master Krizan, one of the most militaristic of the Velkari present. Because it didn't make you weak, Ambassador Park replied. It made you complete. The ability to create as well as destroy, to love as well as fight, to hope, as well as fear. These aren't weaknesses. They're what make life worth living. Krizan's bioneural implants flickered with conflicting signals. His modifications screamed that emotions were weakness, that attachment was vulnerability, that creation was a waste of resources better spent on weapons. But deep beneath the technological conditioning, older instincts stirred. I had a mate. Once, he said suddenly, before the final modifications. She created living sculptures that could grow and change over time. I thought her work was beautiful. What happened to her? Dr. Chun asked gently. The war consumed her. Not killed, consumed. She volunteered for bioweapon integration to help fight the Devourers. By the time the modifications were complete, she could no longer create, only destroy. She became one of our most effective weapons, and I never saw her art again. The pain in his voice was audible even through the mechanical distortions of his bio-enhanced vocal cords. Around the room, other Velkari began sharing similar stories. Artists who became weapons, scientists who forgot their love of discovery, healers who learned only to harm. It doesn't have to stay that way, Dr. Chun said quietly. Biotechnology can be reversed, modified, redirected. If you wanted to, you could probably restore some of what was lost and make ourselves vulnerable. To attack? Krizan asked. From whom? Ambassador Park replied. You've conquered most of the galaxy. The species that might attack you are either dead or too afraid to try. The only enemies you have left are the ones you create by continuing to conquer and consume. War Prince Zekthar felt something crack inside his chest, some barrier that had held back emotions for centuries. He realized that they were not discussing military strategy or technological applications. They were talking about hope, about the possibility of being something other than weapons of destruction. Even if we wanted to change, he said slowly, the galaxy would never trust us. We have destroyed too much, killed too many. There can be no forgiveness for what we have done. Maybe not, Dr. Chon agreed, but there could be redemption. There could be a future where you use your incredible abilities to heal instead of harm, to create instead of destroy. You can't bring back the dead, but you could prevent more deaths. You can't restore the extinct species, but you could protect the ones that remain. The idea was so alien to Velkari, thinking that it took several moments for Zekthar to process. They had spent so long thinking of themselves as destroyers that the concept of becoming protectors seemed impossible. But as he looked around the Room at his warriors, seeing wonder in their eyes for the first time in centuries, hearing them discuss art and beauty and love. He began to believe that perhaps impossible things might be possible after all. 3 weeks had passed since the first contact, and War Prince Zekthar stood in a place he had never expected to visit, the memorial chamber aboard the human station. The walls were covered with images and names, billions of them representing every species and civilization that had fallen to the Velkari Empire over the past 1,000 years. Dr. Chun stood beside him, not speaking, simply allowing him to absorb the magnitude of what he was seeing. Each face represented lives cut short, dreams unfulfilled, entire cultures reduced to nothing more than data points in Velkari military reports. "We kept records," he said quietly, "but not like this. We recorded military statistics, resource, acquisition, strategic value. We never recorded their names, their faces, their stories. Everyone deserves to be remembered," Dr. Chun replied, "even if only by strangers who never knew them." Zekthar reached out with one massive hand to touch a section of the wall displaying children from a world his forces had consumed decades ago. They had been playing in a park when the bioships arrived. He remembered because the scene had been so peaceful, so innocent, that it had briefly confused his targeting systems. "I ordered their deaths," he said, "all of them. I gave the command and watched their world burn." "I know," Dr. Chun said simply. "How can you stand to be in the same room with me? How can any of you?" She was quiet for a long moment, considering her words carefully. "Because I've gotten to know you over these past weeks. I've seen who you really are underneath all the modifications and conditioning. You're not a monster, Zekthar. You're a person who was shaped by circumstances into doing monstrous things." "There's a difference, is there?" he asked. "The dead don't care about my circumstances." "No, they don't," she agreed. "But the living might. The species that are still out there, still afraid, still hiding from you. They might care if you chose to become something different. Through the viewing ports, Zekthar could see his bioships hanging in space like sleeping leviathans. But something had changed in them over the past weeks. The aggressive displays had faded. The hunger signals that usually drove them to seek new prey had quieted. Even the ships themselves seemed to be responding to the emotional transformation of their crews. "My warriors are changing," he said. "Yes, they are," Dr. Chun confirmed. "Some of them, anyway. Not all." That was true. About a third of the fleet remained loyal to the old ways, led by war-cast hardliners who viewed the ongoing discussions as weakness and contamination. They had begun transmitting demands that Zekthar end the talks and begin the conquest as planned. "General Mordak believes I have been compromised by human psychological warfare," Zekthar said. "He may be right. Do you feel compromised?" Dr. Chun asked. Zekthar considered the question seriously. By Velkari standards, he had been compromised. His aggression levels had dropped significantly. His hunger for conquest had been replaced by something he could barely name, a desire to understand, to connect, to find meaning beyond destruction. "Yes," he said finally, "but I think I prefer being compromised to being what I was before." Behind them, the memorial chamber doors opened and Ambassador Park entered, followed by several other humans and a group of Velkari warriors. The mixed group had become common over the past week as more species numbers began participating in the ongoing discussions. "Zekthar," Park said, "we've been working on something we'd like you to see, a proposal for what comes next." They moved to a conference room where holographic displays showed detailed plans and projections. The humans had been working with progressive Velkari scientists and engineers to develop alternatives to the traditional conquest model. "The basic idea," explained Dr. Martinez, the human project coordinator, is to use Velkari biotechnology for restoration instead of destruction. Your ships could be modified to clean up environmental damage, restore dead ecosystems, even bring life back to worlds that have been too damaged to support it naturally. The displays showed bioships transforming barren planets into garden worlds, their living hulls processing toxins and generating breathable atmospheres. Instead of consuming worlds, they would heal them. The technical challenges are significant, admitted Sub-Commander Valthara, but not insurmountable. Many of our biosystems could be repurposed for environmental repair with relatively minor modifications. And the psychological benefits, added Dr. Chun, could be enormous. Instead of creating fear wherever you go, you could create hope. Instead of leaving empty space behind you, you could leave thriving worlds. Zekthar studied the projections with growing fascination. The concept was so radically different from everything the Velkari had done for the past millennium that it was almost inconceivable. But as he watched the simulations of dead worlds returning to life, he felt something stir in his chest. Something. That might have been joy. What about the resistance faction? He asked. General Mordak and his followers will never accept this. That's something we need to address, Ambassador Park agreed. We can't force change on anyone, but we can offer alternatives to those who want them. Over the following days, the proposal was refined and expanded. Human scientists worked alongside reformed Velkari to develop detailed plans for bioship modifications, ecosystem restoration techniques, and psychological rehabilitation programs for warriors who wanted to abandon their military conditioning. The response from the fleet was mixed but encouraging. Nearly half of the Velkari expressed interest in the restoration project. Many had grown tired of endless warfare and were eager to try something different. Others were simply curious about the technical challenges involved, but the resistance faction grew increasingly hostile. General Mordak began broadcasting messages throughout the fleet, denouncing Zekthar as a traitor and calling for his removal from command. Some bioships began showing signs of internal conflict as their crews split between old and new philosophies. The crisis came to a head when Mordak's faction attempted to seize control of the fleet and begin the conquest of the human system by force. The battle that followed was unlike anything in Velkari history. Not an attack on an external enemy, but a civil war between those who chose change and those who clung to the old ways. It was brief but decisive. The bioships that had been modified for restoration work proved surprisingly effective in defensive roles, and the crews that had embraced change fought with a determination born of hope rather than fear. Mordak's faction was defeated, their bioships disabled or captured. It's over, Zekthar announced to the assembled humans and Velkari in the station's main conference room. Those who wish to continue the old ways of conquest have been removed from positions of authority. The rest of us are free to choose a different path. And what path will you choose? Dr. Chun asked. Zekthar looked around the room at faces that had become familiar over the past month. Humans who had shown him kindness when he deserved none. Velkari, who had rediscovered parts of themselves they thought were lost forever. We will try to heal what we have broken, he said. We will use our technology to restore instead of destroy. We will attempt to become worthy of the patience and understanding you have shown us. It won't be easy, Ambassador Park warned. The galaxy will not trust you quickly. There will be species that refuse to work with you, worlds that will flee at your approach, civilizations that will always see you as monsters no matter what you do. I know, Zekthar replied, but we have to try. We have spent 1,000 years being the darkness between stars. Perhaps it is time to learn how to be light instead. The transformation began immediately. Bioships throughout the fleet underwent massive modifications, their weapon systems converting into environmental processors, their hunger drives redirected toward restoration goals. Velkari warriors submitted to psychological rehabilitation, working to undo centuries of conditioning that had made them perfect killers but incomplete people. The first restoration project was a world the Velkari had devastated only 50 years earlier. The planet had been reduced to ash and poison, its atmosphere toxic, its surface lifeless. But the modified bioships worked for months to process the toxins, to seed new life, to slowly nurse the world back to health. When the first green shoots broke through the healing soil, many Velkari wept for the first time in centuries. Word of the transformation spread throughout the galaxy. Some species remained skeptical, convinced it was an elaborate deception. Others were cautiously hopeful. A few brave civilizations even reached out, offering to work with the reformed Velkari on restoration projects. Years passed. The work was slow and difficult, and not every project succeeded. Some Velkari struggled with their new roles, finding it harder to create than to destroy. Some worlds were too damaged to save. Some species would never forgive or trust, no matter what the Velkari did to atone. But gradually, things changed. Dead worlds bloomed with new life. Damaged ecosystems were restored. The galaxy began to see the Velkari not as harbingers of destruction, but as symbols of the possibility of redemption. Dr. Chun, now in her 70s, stood with War Prince Zekthar on the observation deck of his flagship as they watched a restored world spinning peacefully below them. Where, once there, had been only ash, now there were forests and oceans teeming with life.